Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Constitution Day. My name is Jim Glazer. I'm the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences and a professor of political science. It's my privilege to welcome you to this event. My first job out of college back in 1983, 84 was at the Supreme Court, actually, and I was hired to participate in the celebration of the bicentennial of the Constitution. And actually, I was hired to edit a magazine issue that was put out to by the Honor Society Phi Kappa Phi and by the American Bar Association to celebrate the bicentennial. It's now a collector's item. I don't know that anybody has it, but the point is that celebrating the Constitution was serious business. In 2004, Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia included a provision to compel universities and government agencies to celebrate Constitution Day in the Consolidated Appropriations Act of fiscal year 2005. Senator Byrd was a great believer in the Constitution, and in fact, we are compelled by his law to celebrate the Constitution. Indeed, if we don't celebrate, the university's federal funding is actually at stake. Federal financial aid and federal grants could be withheld. So we have celebrated every year since, and not just because we have that strong interest to celebrate, but because this day offers us such an exciting opportunity to put on a meaningful program. Now, here at Tufts, we're not strict constructionists of the law, and we have used a flexible definition of celebration and Constitution, and even of day, since it's not Constitution Day, actually, it's post-Constitution Day, but we're so glad that we have. Today's program featuring Pam Wilmot of Common Cause is no exception to the exceptional people that we've brought in to talk with us about various subjects related to the Constitution and its impact on our contemporary lives. The Political Science Department has been a natural host for our Constitution Day events, and I thank the department and its chair, Debbie Schildkraut, for taking on this important and pleasurable responsibility every year. I also want to thank the President's Office for its support each year as we put on this event. And with that, I'm very pleased to introduce my good colleague and friend, Peter Levine, to introduce our Constitution Day speaker and to host this event. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks everybody for being here, especially thanks to Pam. So I'm not really an expert on the Constitution at all. In fact, I'm so unexpert that whenever I hear about Constitution Day, I always think, how can we have a constitution which allows one senator to require universities to do something on a given day without even anybody else knowing that he's slipped that provision in? However, the point is, I'm not really an expert on this, but I'm here delighted to volunteer to introduce Pam, because Pam and I are friends and, well, colleagues and friends, yes, but also sort of co-conspirators, or we've worked together. So I assume Pam will probably talk about her employer, Common Cause. I just want to say, since Jim and I are middle-aged professors talking about our first job, my first job was at Common Cause. So I worked at the national office for 2 years, and it was education in politics, as well as I think a valuable thing to have done. So Common Cause, Pam, I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but it's the Indefatigable Citizens Lobby. It's a membership organization of Americans who want to see political reform and kind of good government. And it's been around since the early 1970s, very late 1960s. You should talk about it, not me. But and what counts as good government and reform is debatable, and people disagree. And there's usually a lively debate inside of Common Cause as well as in the nation. But they are always there fighting for it, and they're organized around, in the classic American way, around states and a national organization. And so Pam was the leader of the state of Massachusetts organization, and that's where we knew each other. And she's fighting is the right word, although she does it gently, fought for political reform in our Commonwealth, and probably knows more about the nitty-gritty of that than anybody else, does know more about the nitty-gritty of that than anybody else. Just recently, she's moved to, I want to get your title right, got the wrong window open, I'm sorry, but working at the national office as vice president of state operations. And the classic American model is you have state and often local affiliates, and then you have a national. And usually the relationship between the national and the states in any organization is a little fraught. And I think it was in my day at Common Cause. So now Pam's responsible for that. So God bless you for moving to the national office and working with the states. But it's really important to maintain that federal structure and to have state and national working together. Pam is a graduate of Brown, Northeastern University Law School, and Smith College for social work, and has previously worked in other parts of the kind of good government nonprofit world, including PIRG and Connecticut Citizens Action and in Wisconsin. And so a classic campaigner for good government. And it was always a pleasure to work with you, Pam, on local things in Massachusetts, and hoping to keep apprised at least of what's going on in this Commonwealth as we go forward. But we're going to turn it over to you. I guess I have two quick things to say. One is I'm supposed to tell people, if you have questions, please type them in the Q&A box on Zoom. And the other thing is that when Pam is done, our colleague Debbie Schildkraut, who's the chair of political science, is going to take over to moderate the discussion. So just so you know. But with that, Pam, it's all yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the kind welcome, Peter, and to Jim and Debbie for inviting me to be your somewhat delayed Constitutional Day speaker. It's such a great honor and a privilege to be here with you today to discuss these important issues. Today and any day are really a great opportunity. I'm happy to talk about this at almost any time. So as Peter said, I'm Pam Wilmot, and I am Vice President of the State Operations at Common Cause. And as he also mentioned, we're a national nonpartisan watchdog organization. We now have 1.2 million supporters in 25 staff chapters, 30 overall. And for over 50 years, Common Cause has been fighting for open and accountable government and free and fair elections, enhance voting and civil rights, promoting open meetings, and ensuring a fair census, stopping gerrymandering, and so many other things. As Peter also sort of mentioned, we were founded in 1970 by John Gardner, who was the only Republican in the Johnson administration. He was a college professor, a military intelligence officer, president of the Carnegie Companies, an author, cabinet official, advisor to many presidents, and wrote many eloquent and wise things about what makes a good leader and a good society. But what Gardner saw was that government was in a deep need of renewal at that time, that it had become unresponsive, untrustworthy, closed, and too corrupt. And with his leadership and that of many leaders that followed, Common Cause worked with citizens, thought leaders, and members of Congress from both parties who put country over party to help pass major democracy reforms that sought to correct some of the most egregious abuses of power. Some of those achievements we might have heard of, or at least what they accomplished. The Election Campaign Act, which established public financing for presidential candidates, set campaign contribution limits, established reporting, and much more, including some provisions like spending limits that were struck down by our US Supreme Court. The Ethics in Government Act, which established conflict of interest standards and financial reporting for government candidates and employees. The ethics and the voting rights reauthorizations, the Government in the Sunshine Act and other FOIA, Freedom of Information Act improvements. And all of these are extremely consequential to this day. In most states, Common Cause state chapters did very much the same thing, working with Democrats and Republicans to solve the systematic problems of the day, at least in some of the accessibility to government field. Here in Massachusetts, where I served as the executive director for many, many years, I actually started much longer than I care to admit. Many of the rights that you and I take for granted today are the result of common causes, lobbying, and ballot initiative campaigns. The right to attend an open meeting, the right to request a public document, the right to see what campaign funds are raised or spent, or what money is spent on lobbying. Common Cause is directly responsible for not only helping to establish or expand those rights, but also led the efforts to establish the state offices that enforce them: the State Ethics Commission, the State's Campaign Finance Office, and the State's Inspector General Office. So here we are at a very different and scary moment in history. Constitution Day is a perfect opportunity to reflect on where we are as a nation and where our democratic institutions are at the moment. Constitution Day correctly honors our founding father and our founding charter with its promise of freedom and participatory democracy and its vision of government, where we all have an equal voice in the decisions that affect our country and in choosing our leaders, no matter what zip code, no matter what we look like, no matter how much money we have. But from its inception, the Constitution failed to live up to its lofty principles and the rhetoric of our founding leaders. Our founding fathers and their successors denied political participation and even basic human rights to whole swaths of people, at times even violently: Indigenous people, enslaved people, Black people, women, the unhoused, immigrants, those who don't own property. The list goes on, as does the legacy of excluding so many for so long. Yet the Constitution's dynamism and how we understand who it protects has substantially expanded over the centuries. And we can be hopeful because the arc of the and our democracy in this country does, to paraphrase Martin Luther King and Theodore Parker, bend towards justice, even with detours and shameful exceptions to end the scary moment that we're in today. Throughout our history, people have worked and even died for our constitutional rights that have otherwise been denied them, including heroes like Diane Nash, who led the Freedom Riders, civil litigators like Thurgood Marshall, leaders like Martin Luther King and John Lewis, and so many more. And of course, the millions of unsung heroes who have taken action in myriad ways to build a better democracy. Today, a new generation leaders, new and seasoned full-time advocates, and those like many here in the audience, I'm sure, who take the actions that they can and continue to work, even in the wake of deadly police violence against Black Americans, attacks on reproductive freedom, and a gutted Federal Voting Rights Act, to expand our democracy and fulfill the promise of all men and women created equal, admittedly from the Declaration of Independence and not the Constitution. Today, we are at a crossroads with a strong movement to both effectively expand the franchise and to shrink access to voting by implementing new barriers to political participation. This is not by accident, but intentional manipulation of voting rules to exclude population and roll back some of the reforms that we have actually won and have been working well for many years. So let me start to share some slides with you that will go in a little bit more depth. And then I'm really looking forward to, actually, it's not working again, Andrew. Hopefully I can share my screen.
You should have the capability.
Okay, they just started to work. So, can we also do this? No, not gonna work. Okay, so last November, despite all the barriers in place and a record number of Americans turned out for the 2020 elections. They showed up in record numbers despite a deadly pandemic, and it was the highest turnout in more than a century. There's some other numbers that contradict that, but this is it's regardless of which ones you look at, it was a huge increase, and something we can be partly very proud of. So what were some of the reasons? Largely temporary voting laws were passed by state legislatures, governors, and election officials from both parties, along with, of course, the historically important presidential race and a deeply unpopular president, which drove a lot of the motivation to turn out. And with the expansion of vote by mail in most states, 45, people could actually safely and effectively cast their vote. But even in those places where vote by mail was still difficult, and by the way, absentee voting is also vote by mail. I'm using the two interchangeably. And if you have a question at some point, we could talk about that a little bit more. Voters still turned out in droves, regardless of whether they were a state with or without. But the states that did expand saw even more participation. Interestingly, vote by mail, or at least absentee voting, was an innovation established decades ago and was strongly supported by the Republican Party, and until very recently, and some would argue still recently, vote by mail participants tend to be older and whiter than in-person voters. But then came the backlash. Incited by President Trump's big lie about a stolen election, a racist mob ransacked the Capitol and tried to disrupt the the peaceful transfer of power, marching through the halls of Congress with zip ties, cudgels, bear spray, Confederate flags. This threatened the Constitution in the process that we have held dear and has actually worked well for our entire history. Afterwards, 147 members voted against certifying the election results. Republican legislators then took the baton and acted quickly in 2021 to introduce new laws to make it harder to vote, especially in Black communities. 18 states elected 30 new laws to restrict access to vote, and more than 400 bills were introduced throughout the country, according to the Brennan Center for Justice. These laws include reducing the time for vote by mail, making it easier to kick people off the voter lists, cutting the number of mail drop boxes, new voters for voters with disability, cuts to early voting, even bans on giving water to voters in hours-long lines for in-person voting locations. Perhaps even more scarily, there have been many bills to circumvent professional election administration. 14 states have enacted laws shifting some aspects of election authority to partisan decision makers and or criminalizing election administrative errors as a way of threatening nonpartisan election administration. Combined with phony audits like the one in Arizona and a nationwide epidemic of resignations by election officials in response to death threats, verbal harassments, and the like, these new laws, the faith in our election system is being undermined everywhere, and it's no wonder. According to a recent CNN poll, 56% of Americans feel the democracy is under attack in this country. 51% say that it's also likely that the US will successfully overturn the results of a future election because their party did not win. Nearly all Americans, 93%, feel that the US is at least being tested, and only a scant 6% say that democracy is not in danger. Although there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud in the 2020 elections, 36% of Americans say that Joe Biden did not legitimately get enough votes to win the presidency. Among Republicans, that's a shocking 78%. One piece of good news in all this unrest and conflict has been increased attention to the Constitution. For the first time in 15 years, a majority of people could name all three branches of the federal government in a new survey conducted by the Annenberg Public Policy Center. People were also more aware of the rights afforded to them by the Constitution in the past and could name many of the freedoms in the First Amendment. This is true regardless of the partisan divide. Another good piece of good news in all the craziness is that America is waking up to the realities of racism, although we are deeply divided by party as to how serious this is. But there is hope to actually protect and expand the freedom to vote. Congress has the power to override these new state laws and set fair national standards for all Americans to vote in federal elections. Additionally, states can have also act on their own to expand the franchise and make for more fair and equitable elections that are accessible to all. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm sure some of you may remember the federal government did act after the 2000 election with the Help America Vote Act, which did set some minimal standards that and provided a number of things that are still very helpful in our elections today. So one proposal to protect voting rights is the Freedom is for the People Act, H.R. 1 S1 in Congress, which was actually recently amended to have a new title. The new title is the Freedom to Vote Act. Pursuant to Congress's constitutional power to set time, place, and manner decisions in our elections, it provides basic standards like 15 days of early voting, vote by mail for all who want it, restored voting rights for all past felony convictions, for those who are no longer incarcerated, and automatic voter registration to ensure voting lists are accurate. It creates ways to finance our campaigns so that representatives rely on donations from small dollar donor constituents rather than wealthy special interests. It creates and upholds ethical standards, and critically, the bill bans partisan gerrymandering. Too many Americans have been silenced by politicians who choose their voters rather than the other way around. Provision by provision, the For the People Act / Freedom to Vote Act, which are actually very similar. We can, again, in the Q&A, talk a little bit about what the differences are. They're not huge. By setting a floor to stop unnecessary purges, modernizing how they vote, undoing the damage caused by Citizens United, and tackling corruption head on. By ending partisan gerrymandering of congressional districts, this bill will end the insidious practice of politicians picking their voters, and particularly in states like, as we've seen in states like Arizona and California, the competitive districts are so critically to making for fair elections and competitive districts. The bill also institutes new protections for communities of color, people who are most hurt by gerrymandered districts. In general, the bill not only helps prevent gerrymandering before it happens, but it also provides a path for challenging unfair maps in court if that is necessary. Fair districts promotes legitimate representation so that voters can choose their public servants. Fair districts makes it possible for members of Congress to work with one another in good faith and not worry whether that cooperation will foment a primary challenge from the most extreme elements in their party, which are packed into their district. So here in this slide are some of the key provisions on election access in the Freedom to Vote Act. I think I have mentioned almost all of those except for same-day voter registration, which is a big and important change, strengthening list maintenance standards, which are both good for ensuring that people are not unnecessarily removed, but also are not, that there is some maintenance happening. It has some standards for voter identification. This is a little change from the other, from the previous version, but it actually is one that we can all live with, and will get rid of some of the most draconian lists and be relatively similar to the Help of America Vote Act, but slightly beefed up in states that don't have that. So another area that is new in the Freedom to Vote Act is to really strengthen the prevent election subversion, to make sure that partisan election administration is the rule of the day, nonpartisan, as opposed to transferring many of those duties to state legislatures, who by their very nature are partisan and self-interested. I think we've gone over most of those. There is also a state election assistance and innovation fund to help provide funding for all these things, nonpartisan oversight of federal elections, and stopping super PAC coordination, along with some campaign finance disclosure acts. The Disclose Act was a big deal that we couldn't get done in 2018. Our very own Scott Brown was the deciding vote that didn't go along with that. We passed it here in Massachusetts already. It's a common sense reform to ensure that everyone knows who is paying for campaign ads. Of equal importance is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. This act will repair and strengthen the Voting Rights Act, which was gutted by the Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County in 2013, going through more recently, to stop voting practices that discriminate against voters according to race or language minority status. The Voting Rights Act traditionally has always been supported and reauthorized on a bipartisan basis, and there's no excuse for this not happening this year. Both of these bills have already passed the House of Representatives, are pending in the Senate. They have strong support of the American people, both from all parties, and they could come up at any time. The Freedom to Vote Act will be first, and John Lewis Voting Rights Act will be a little later. But procedural votes will be happening. We do expect a filibuster, and we'll have to see how that all proceeds. But the filibuster is a whole nother issue that is very anti-democratic, because it isn't just Mr. Smith goes to Washington and someone's standing up, but you literally have a staffer make a phone call, and the threshold for a vote is 60 instead of 50. That is in the Constitution. Building a fair democracy is how we achieve long-term advances on issues not only related to themselves, but also from issues from employment to education to healthcare to housing. These issues affect every other issue that faces this country. It's how we protect the right to vote and the right to representation that ensures equal protection under the law, and not just case by case, but the institutions that govern our society and the process that make our country work have to be accessible and open to all. Now's the time for Congress to exercise its constitutional authority to protect the structure of our representative democracy. Otherwise, we will slip even deeper into a system where self-interested politicians use the tools of governance to keep themselves in power with no regard for the desires of the people they represent. Ensuring a true representative democracy is how we advance equality, opportunity, and justice in areas where too many Americans are still let down, left out, and left behind. It's how we enshrine equality in federal law, and it's how we count every vote to make every vote count. Passing these bills, it will be a critical and necessary step to restoring power to the people where it belongs. So another ray of hope is that certain states have really worked hard to expand the franchise and make voting more fair and equitable and accessible to all. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, at least 25 states have enacted 54 laws to expand voting provisions. These laws expand access to early and mail voting, make voter registration easier, and restore voting rights to Americans with past convictions, among other measures. Many of the states in which voting is already comparatively more accessible are the ones, unfortunately, enacting these policies. More than 900 bills with expansive provisions have been introduced in 49 states and 21 legislatures before. And of these, 54 laws have been passed. So let's take a quick look. You can see here on this slide all the different laws and the states that have passed them. Expanding early voting, easing mail voting. Just yesterday, Governor Gavin Newsom signed in a full vote by mail bill. That was something that they did in the last election, but making that permanent, joining 8 other states, Oregon and Washington being some of the most notable, but also Utah, Colorado, in providing a mail ballot directly to every voter in their mailbox without application. Expanding mail drop-back access, easing voter registration or modernizing it, getting greater access to voters with disabilities, improving language access, protecting polling place access, and expanding election day registration, and other things. This is a list here. Here in our home state of Massachusetts, the Votes Act was introduced by Senator Cindy Cream and Representative John Wan. It was approved by the Joint Committee on Election Laws and should be voted in the state Senate very soon. Maybe as we're heard early October, so very, very soon. The bill not only codifies the voting expansions that Common Cause helped write and successfully advocate for in 2020. I don't know, all of you, if you vote here in Massachusetts, you remember receiving in the mail for probably the first time an application where you could pick whether you wanted to receive a absentee mail ballot for, we call it early voting by mail, but frankly, all these terms all mean the same thing. And you could pick for both elections in one mailing. Because of these 2020 changes, voters were able to participate safely and securely. And the Vote Acts will make those reforms that were passed last year permanent, but it will do that and more. It's a comprehensive election bill that will allow Massachusetts citizens to keep the voting options and the practices that we did in 2020, but also include badly needed reforms to ensure eligible incarcerated voters have meaningful access to the ballot, have same-day voter registration, and ensure that that automatic voter registration, which we passed in 2018, and another thing called ERIC, actually works. So let's take a look. Mail-in voting here in Massachusetts, we went from about 4% of our voters voting by mail in prior to 2020 to about half. It was a huge success. I think the genie is now out of the bottle, and more people will continue to vote by mail. It's certainly very convenient. Same-day voter registration. This is an issue that we've been around the block a couple of times. In Massachusetts, it is used in 21 states, including our neighboring states of Maine and New Hampshire for many, many years. Decades. It is the best way as a fail-safe automatic voter registration. Other things help people to update, but it really allows for those that fall through the cracks to provide the information they need to register right there at the polls. Risk limiting audits is another reform that has come favorably out of committee. That is a statistical way of reviewing all the ballots that have been cast to ensure that they're counted properly and that there is no issues with the actual administration of the election. ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center, was a reform that was passed in 2018, but never implemented. It is sort of the good guy alternative to cross-check. It is now 30 states are involved in DC. And what happens with ERIC is the states share their voter registration databases along with their motor vehicle registration, the federal Social Security information, death records, et cetera, to give accurate information about who should be on the voter rolls and who should not, who has moved, who has died, who has moved into your state. It's a important and good reform. And jail-based voting reforms is another piece of the bill. There's about 9,000 pre-trial or misdemeanor folks in prison and jails, and a very small percentage of them were actually able to vote. And part of that is there's no real responsibility for providing that access. So the bill would provide common sense reforms to ensure that people who still retain their right to vote have the ability to do so. So another promising reform, which has been moving through the country, is national popular vote. We've passed it here in Massachusetts, and there is momentum building across the country. National popular vote is based on a simple principle. The American people should pick who serves as president of the United States, and the candidate with the most votes should win. National popular vote would guarantee the candidate with the most votes would actually win the presidency, the most votes from people across the nation in all 50 states. Legislation would ensure that the legislation, once passed by enough states, would ensure that every vote is equal and that every vote in every state will matter in every presidential election. So how does the current system work? The Constitution gives each state electors equal to the number of all congressmen and senators combined. This is what we call the Electoral College. That term is actually not in the Constitution. Most states give all of their electors to the winner of their state, regardless of whether the candidate wins by one vote or by millions. So that's winner take all laws. These winner take all laws are not in the Constitution, and they have changed many, many times. Maine and Nebraska use a different congressional district system. Here in Massachusetts, we've actually changed the way we've selected electors 11 different times. Initially, the legislature picked who would be the presidential elector slate and did not allow people to vote. They bounced back and forth and reverted to that a number of times. but in between they use special presidential elector districts. The congressional district system that Maine and Nebraska now use was also used in Massachusetts, a combination of all the above. So there is actually no constitutional right to vote for president. It is a creature of the state legislatures who have passed, by and large, these winner-take-all laws. So the winner-take-all laws are largely responsible for the inherent problems of the current system. Candidates have no reason to poll, advertise, organize, or visit states where they cannot possibly win or they cannot possibly lose. And because of the winner-take-all laws, there are very few states that are actually competitive, and we all know who they are. We hear about them all the time: Ohio, Florida, and 6 or so others that vary with demographic shifts. Voters in these states, not the public as a whole, are the ones that pick a president. The rest of us are spectators. And the current system also means that candidate who places second in the national popular vote was elected. And that has happened in 5 different times, including, and we've had very many near misses especially in recent time. That's not democracy. So the system leaves most voters out, and it also depresses voter participation. Because the voters in swing states are about 7% higher voter participation. That's because they're courted, they get almost hounded to go out to vote. And the rest of us, they literally, campaigns don't even have offices in our states, other than to their duty when they do have is to get them on phone banks to call into the swing states. And to go to, back before the pandemic at least, to go and door knock in those few swing states. So here is in 2020, here are the total general election visits. You can see how concentrated they are. There's a few odd places, but it's really very concentrated. In 2016, it was a little bit more spread out. There were a little bit more states in play. But prior to that, there were even less. 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012 were even more concentrated than the past 2. Under the National Popular Vote Plan, once how the system would work is that once enough states which comprise a majority of the Electoral College pass identical legislation, that is 2 states representing 270 electors of the 538 total, in other words, enough to elect a president. They all give their electoral votes as a block, so all 270, to the winner of the popular vote, not in their own states, but in all 50 states. The process is actually very simple. All states have to provide under federal law their unofficial vote totals. We also have them that are necessary for local elections. The National Popular Vote Plan is an interstate compact, a type of law that is available by the U.S. Constitution, authorized there, that allows states to enter into legally enforceable contractual obligations. There are more than 1,000 such laws in the country. They cover everything from radioactive waste disposal to transportation to dairy to food to all sorts of things. And in dicta, in several Supreme Court cases, of course, these were a while ago and every Supreme Court is different. There was some since this was a possibility, the states could compact together for the purpose of electoral college votes. The effect of a national popular vote compact is the same as a constitutional amendment, but it has the benefit of retaining the power to control elections in the state's hand. This is a feature that is critical to some of our passionate bipartisan support, not so much for the Democrats, but for our Republican supporters. The benefits of a national popular vote are clear. It would ensure the candidate of the most votes is elected. Every vote in every state would be equal. It would increase civic participation by giving voters in all states an incentive to vote in elections, and campaigns an incentive to reach out and to involve us all. It would eliminate those misleading red and blue election maps. In reality, we're not red states or blue states. We're all various states of purple, and would give a single group of millions of voters with a less opportunity for manipulating the results by changing a few of the laws that are related in those states. Think about Florida 2000, with 10% of what is needed to win an election riding on 500 votes. 500 votes in the state of Florida are easily changed by voting procedures in that state. Much harder when you're talking about 500,000, million, 5 million, 7 million votes. So many states have passed national popular vote, many more than you might think. 15 states in the District of Columbia. By the way, the District of Columbia does have under the ability to vote in the presidential election. They do not have congressional representation, but they do vote for president, have 3 electors. So we have 195 electoral votes out of the 270 needed. That means there's only 75 electoral votes to go. So we actually had 196 and only 74 to go, but New York lost an electoral vote in the most recent census cycle and reapportionment. So given that this is an interesting topic that engenders lots of questions, let me review just a few of the myths and facts and about national popular vote, and then we will get to your questions, which is always my favorite part of the time. So some of the people just go immediately to, we can't do a national popular vote because big cities will control the outcome. Well, in reality, rural and urban America are each 19% of the population, according to the US Census Bureau. The 100 biggest cities have roughly 59 million people, and rural America, again defined by the US Census, has roughly 59 million people. The 60% of the rest of the population live in suburbs, and suburbs are equally divided, and they're the swing areas in our country. Some people object because they think the Electoral College was designed to help small states. It actually was very intimately involved with the 3/5 compromise and with slave-holding states who didn't want to be outvoted by their brethren that had more of their population actually able to vote. And in fact, it doesn't really help the small states. Smaller, less populated states are actually equally split between large states and, between democratic states, reliably democratic states, and reliably red states. There's one swing state in the small group, and that is New Hampshire. So you'll see in the maps above, New Hampshire, especially this time, did get a number of visits and some interest. And similarly, the 16 highest population states are not actually a Democratic lock. There's actually more red states than there are blue states. Of course, California is the biggest, but Texas is a red state and it's second. Small states do not benefit and from the system. This little cartoon from nationalpopularvote.com shows some reason why. For example, Wisconsin with 10 electoral votes got 40 visits and a ton of money, while the 8 smallest states with 24 electoral votes only had 1 campaign visit and no money or attention. One of the other things that was on the list, but I haven't actually said, is that all this attention does actually equate to other benefits as well. There was a BU professor that did a study that battleground states got twice as many disaster declarations, and for similar events got twice as much money as safe states. There have been plenty of political books written where former campaign officials talk about how they took the side of a battleground state in order to curry favor with their votes. How popular is all this? Well, it has been very popular for a long time. Actually, some of these numbers I've seen have been higher. The percentage of people who want to amend the Constitution. So this is National Popular Vote specifically, has always had a support of a majority of the population. We went down in 2016 because of the Trump election, and I think some voters automatically think that it's going to help a Democratic candidate. It would not necessarily. We're a divided country, and candidates would campaign differently than they do now. So I've talked a lot today and covered a lot of ground, but I am anxious to get your questions, which I said is always my favorite part. I wish this format supported more back and forth, but we work with what we have. And I think I'm seeing Andrew's screen, but anyway, and that is true in the political landscape as well. Along with the realism, though, it's so important to remember the great values that propel our Constitution and our democracy, and to have hope and vision for a better future. I always tell folks that it isn't just sort of the folks that are against democracy or expanding the franchise that you have to be careful. It's also with cynicism and turning away from all of the hard work that we have to do. Without hope, we become cynical and corrupt and turn away from the work of democracy, which is never easy. It is the very nature of our nation, our political institutions, to centralize and secretize. And it is up to the rest of us to hold our side of the bargain, to push the doors open, to hold our leaders accountable, and to fight for equity and inclusion for all. To repeat I always love to remind people of Margaret Mead, famous sociologist, who said that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world is the only thing that ever has. And I, in my career, have seen that over and over again. Maybe not in the timetable we want, maybe not to the extent we want, but real and concrete change for the better has been made and can be in the future, regardless. What time frame is, I don't know. What the future holds, I do not know, but I know that we will get there. So let's do some questions.
All right, thank you so much. I'm assuming people can hear me, not sure if they can see me, but I'm Debbie Schildkraut. I'm the chair of the Political Science Department, and I am thrilled that you were able to give this talk today. You covered so much important ground, and you know what, I'm teaching Introduction to American Politics this semester, and one thing we've been going over a lot so far is just how this work is never done. You can't feel like, all right, we've gotten there. You know, we're done. We can clean, you know, wipe our hands now and sit back and relax. That this work is ongoing, and you've made that very clear. So my job for the rest of the time today is to help moderate the questions that people post. Thank you to everyone who's been with us this time. Let me remind you that if you have questions for Pam, you can post them in the Q&A. We also have some questions that were submitted in advance by people who registered. So I'm going to do a mix of maybe combining questions that might have been similar. So if you posted a question, I may not read it exactly as you posted it. I may paraphrase or combine it with similar questions that have been asked. I also want to make sure that before I forget, that I thank Andrew Alquesto, who is our administrative coordinator in political science, who makes sure that everything runs smoothly and that you all learned about this and were able to register and all of that. So thank you, Andrew. And I want to make sure that all of our other co-sponsors were acknowledged as well. Jumbo Vote, an amazing student organization. If you're not familiar with them, or if you're wondering how can you register to vote, how can you learn more about things that are on the ballot, go to jumbovote.org. They're a great organization. Also the Tisch College of Civic Life, the department, the Civic Studies program, and of course, as Dean Glazer mentioned, the Office of the President, and his office, the Office of the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences. Okay, so that's a long introduction to our question period. The first question that I want to pose to you is that many of our students care deeply about these issues, and I imagine that they listen to you and find themselves wondering, you know, I kind of want to do this with my life. So can you talk a little bit about how you went from being, you know, an 18-year-old college freshman or whenever you started college to doing the work that you do now? What's the path that they might envision for themselves if they also want to devote themselves to this kind of work?
Yeah, I actually started very early. I kind of knew that this is what I wanted to do. So I started, I think my first job as a freshman after my freshman summer was going door to door for Connecticut Citizen Action Group, raising money. MassPIRT does that. A bunch of other groups do it. Maybe not the best in the pandemic, but you know, doing the work as a and then I also volunteered to organize a number of things on my campus at Brown, and one actually, Ralph Nader saw the work I was doing and hired me to go out and do organizing for him, and started something called the Citizens Utility Board in Wisconsin. And, you know, I love the work. I love the work not only because I can bring my values to work, and then as I mentioned about democracy, you get to work on everything else that you care about as well. I do think that social justice and social change is a little bit like the Buddhist adage, you know, one mountain, many ways up. There are many things that you need to work on. There is no silver bullet per se. What motivates you, what brings your passion to, is what you should focus on, obviously with some humility, and to realize that, you know, it may be the most burning, passionate thing to you, but there are also other things that are important as well. So get out there, volunteer, go to that phone bank, go help organize a rally, be a leader, take that extra step and to put yourself out there. But if you don't have that time or inclination, everything helps. Write a letter to the editor. You know, send a message to your elected official, get involved in a political campaign. That's one thing that I haven't done in my career, but is also very important. Run for office yourself. I think one thing that I have seen, which is, I think, a double-edged sword, is that we have we're as a society not as collectively based as we used to be. And so it is harder for people to learn how to plug into other things that are going. So the first idea is, let me start my own organization. Well, my suggestion is work with others first, find out if there really is a need. And then still, there is an old African adage that my former president used to say, if you want to walk fast, walk alone. And if you want to walk far, which we have to do in this fight, walk together. We have to work together. So get involved, and you could very easily turn it into a career.
And how important would a law degree be for this kind of work?
So it's not, I have a law degree. I think it is very helpful in terms of analyzing laws and writing laws, but there's lots of other ways of being involved with political change. You can be a communications expert. You can be an organizer. You can write great speeches. There's a lot. You can be a creative artist. There's lots of different things, and they're all valuable. So using your own talents, law has a way of sucking you in and turning you into a corporate lawyer. It is just the nature of law school, and that's fine. But it also has tremendous opportunity costs. It's 3 years of your life. There is a Tisch College. There is many of other public policy programs, which are other options. But I think, it depends also what you see. For one of my assistants who worked for me for a number of years, really his goal was to be a congressional analyst. So he actually got into Harvard Law School, but decided not to go to Georgetown because he wanted to be in DC and to go into a congressional office. And sure enough, right afterwards, he was hired to be in an area that he wanted to be an expert in, which was media communications and media policy for our own Senator Markey. So, follow that passion.
Great. Thank you. We had a couple of people post questions about the two federal bills that you started your talk with. People who were not quite optimistic that these are going to pass, even though they've both been passed by the House. And so in the spirit of looking for optimism, somebody asked, is there another way to enact some of it? Do you think some of it might get passed separately as smaller bills, or do you not share their pessimism? Do you think that these bills will get passed?
I don't think that the door is closed. There has been a lot of movement. There has been some compromise. Senator Manchin is the sponsor of this revised law. He is very passionate about it. And I think, again, the issue is the filibuster, and there has to be some reform there, either completely abolished or some additional reforms to make it a different kind of activity than the current default that it is. It literally is as simple as not even the senator, but a staffer, even a junior staffer, making a phone call or writing an email. And that's not what our founders intended. And that creates a lot of gridlock. We could talk a long time about this, and there are some philosophical reasons where in this very divided time, sing-sawing back and forth. But and I think that's what's we've gotten to the point, and some of the media and democracy issues are very important because we're in a moment where people not only are working with different opinions, they're working with different facts. And that's because their news channels are so siloed. And that is something that is relatively new. Maybe the beginning of our union, we also had much more limited access to news, and we had party newspapers. We didn't tend to have, nonpartisan journalism. It was very much driven by party, and then people came to brawl in the street all the time. So I think we will get through this, though, and I do think we will have some reforms along these lines. The Voting Rights Act certainly has a much stronger chance across the board. And we're making great inroads, and I'm still very hopeful that we will get this over the finish line.
Okay, all right. We had somebody ask about other possible reforms that might change or enhance the degree to which people engage in electoral politics. He was interested in your thoughts about open primaries and also ranked choice voting.
Great question. So I was very disappointed that our ranked choice voting ballot question did not pass here in Massachusetts. I think ranked choice voting is a great reform. It's really as simple as 1, 2, 3. I think the timing couldn't have been worse. Voters were facing all sorts of different changes, and having this change on top of everything just didn't seem like it made sense. The Boston election was actually a really great example of how it could play out. So we had a Boston mayoral election where we had 3 Black candidates, 2 of whom had the clear majority of the vote, but they split it. And so neither of them got into the final runoff. Often, cities that have ranked choice voting have a one-shot deal, but it doesn't have to be that. You can also have a runoff situation, or maybe it wouldn't be 2, maybe it would be 3. But the way you advance a candidate is still with those that have the majority support. And the thing that's great about ranked choice voting is you're never in a situation of telling people they need to withdraw from a race and that they shouldn't run for office because they're going to split the vote. And that happened in Boston, and that is just wrong. We need more women of color running for office. We don't need less. We shouldn't be telling them to get out of the race. We should have a voting system where people can vote for who they want to without hurting their second choice. And that's exactly what the current system does. You have the, spoiler effects. You think about Florida 2000. I mentioned that as an example where, voting for Ralph Nader was hurting Al Gore instead of and helping George Bush, even though the candidates would have gone the other way around. So it has been used in many places. It works. It's not as hard as it sounds. And I really think there are no reasons not to pass it. Open primaries are a little bit different. They work differently in different places. One of the problems is that there's a couple of different ways you can mean with open primaries. You can have anybody allowed to vote in a partisan primary, where then you have Republicans coming into the Democratic primary trying to steer it one way or the other. You also can have a jungle primary, which means that there's no partisan ones. Everybody is together, and then the top 2 go forward. I think with ranked choice voting, that system could work, but without it, I think the current system we have is better. And Massachusetts has a good open primary piece, which is allowing unregistered people or independents to vote in whatever party that they want. And in Massachusetts, that's 60% of the registered voters. So a majority of our state already does have access to an open primary. It's just those that are enrolled in a party who identify can't go into a different party and try to put their thumb on the scale. And I think that makes sense.
Great. So what do you say to people who worry that vote by mail is just an invitation to voter fraud, that it seems hard for people to imagine that this can be done in a way that doesn't lead to multiple people voting or any other types of voting irregularities?
Well, one, the ballots are sent out. They have barcodes. Government actually does know who lives at various addresses. Voter rolls can, and that's one of the reasons we support the Electronic Registration Information Center, ERIC, to have better voter rolls. There is specific identifying information. And then many states do signature matching so that there is a record there of the person signing the ballot. It is true that vote by mail can result on, and this is true whether it's absentee voting or full vote by mail. So just to clarify, so I use the term interchangeably, but some people, when they say vote by mail, mean the system that California just passed and that Oregon and Washington and Utah and a number of other states have, where they send a ballot. And then absentee voting is what we have in Massachusetts and in all the other states, where you actually have to apply to get a ballot sent to you, and then that is sent to your address. So it's a two-step process versus a one-step process. It has been around for a long time. There really has been no evidence of fraud. Occasionally, and this is more in the absentee system, you can go to a nursing home and get collect a bunch of ballots and, and force people to, or coerce them into filling them out in your favor. That did happen once in Massachusetts a long time ago. It has happened in a few other places. That is actually more common than in-person voter fraud, which is essentially, non-existent. But whatever change you make, there are consequences. And you have to be looking at how can we accomplish the rule that involves the most voters, so expands the franchise to have a real democracy, and how can we do it safely and securely? You can't manage a system for all the small exceptions. You can plan for them, you can mitigate them, but I remember sitting down on, I can't remember what the issue was. I think it was where one of the senators told me, who's no longer in the state Senate, that he would rather disenfranchise 10,000 individuals than have one person who was ineligible vote, or 100,000. He didn't care. So the one person. That's not how our system can work. It's like, and in reality, we're talking about a handful of people and millions of votes. Does it happen on rare occasion? Almost never in person, but occasionally, fill out a mail ballot for your spouse or, your kid who's there and you have access. But there's huge penalties for doing that. And people have actually gone to jail for doing something as simple as filling it out for their kid. So our justice system, particularly at different times, has spent a lot of time and money going after people for these issues. It's a big risk. It's not something that organized campaigns tend to do unless they want to go to jail.
Yeah, I get students ask me sometimes, wait, so what's to stop me from voting here as a student and also voting at home absentee where I'm from? And I said, well, because you could go to jail for it. But technically, sure, yeah. I mean, if you wanted to, you probably could do that. But like you said, there's a cost. And I think that for some people, just the threat of it is hard for them to accept that that's the only thing that's stopping it from happening more often.
And so with Eric, you would be caught.
Yeah.
Right. And also you would be caught anyway, because even if there is an Eric, every state, even if you have same-day voter registration, so you can't be registered in two different places, but let's say one state has absentee voting, same day, you would vote there and then your other state would be pinged, or it's possible it would be put in a conditional status. Some states do have it as there's different statuses of, it's not provisional. It's something called a challenge ballot. It's basically where it counts unless there's something, but it's marked in some way that it can be pulled at some point. But anyway, you get pinged. So they know that you voted twice and you're in big trouble. It isn't like it's just, somehow these systems never talk to each other. They do. They are not like, totally integrated, but they are, they do communicate all the time, and those things go back and forth. So
Great.
It's not worth spending 10 years in jail for a single vote. It isn't going to make any difference anyway.
We have a question from Professor Levine. He wants to know your thoughts on how can people engage with Common Cause or other organizations in this field?
So we have, I mean, this is a little bit different time still with a little more remote than we have been in the past. But our just send an email. www.commoncause.org is our website. Massachusetts, and nationally and in Mass, we have phone banks, we have events, we have ways that people can engage with legislation. We have a big lobby day coming up, which is mostly virtual. You could participate in that. Many times we do ballot questions. We haven't done one in Massachusetts for a while, but those are great campaigns to be involved in other states. Communications is really what this work is about, and there's always room for more of that. So writing postcards, writing letters to the editor, writing is a very important skill, and the way we do a lot. So look up the organization that you care about on the web, send them an email, give them a call, and they'll try to get you involved in one way or another.
Great. Does Common Cause work on or advocate for a constitutional amendment to establish an affirmative right to vote?
That is a good question. So the idea has been floated at different times. And it has always, you certainly wouldn't oppose that idea. I think, it would be fine and a good idea, but the question is, does it advance the cause? And is it worth the amount of time and effort that it would require versus a constitutional amendment to establish a popular vote, or a constitutional amendment to allow spending limits and to say that corporations don't have the same electoral rights or free speech rights that natural people do. Those kinds of things kind of lend themselves more to a advancing of the issue than a sort of a general constitutional right to vote, which would there are state constitutions that have it. We have one in Massachusetts. We do have one in there's a number of states, and they have actually been helpful. We sued in North Carolina over their gerrymandered redistricting maps and lost in federal court, Rucho, but we did win in state court. So under the same, under that theory. So it isn't like it wouldn't have anything. That is not where the movement is at the moment.
Great. So one last call for any more questions for someone to post, but unless something pops up right now, that is through the questions that I've compiled. So I'll take this time to thank you so much for taking the time to prepare for today, to spend the time with us today, share your thoughts on these issues. I'm encouraged to hear your optimism about the possibilities. And I think it's really instructive to see the map of the states where there's action to make voting easier. We hear a lot in the news about places where it's made harder, but I think it's important to remember there's a lot of advocacy and action happening all the time. In the other direction and succeeding. So I think it's, at a minimum, it's important to keep reminding people of that, particularly when I said earlier, one of the themes we talk about is you can't consider yourself done. And seeing some of these victories, I think, is important for people. So I'm really glad you took the time to point that out. So happy belated Constitution Day, everybody, and thank you to all of our attendees who joined us today. And again, thank you, Pam, for joining us today and for all the work that you're doing to expand voting access for all voters in the United States.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Dean Glazer. Really appreciate it, and all of you out there. It was really fun. Thank you so much.